Well, this week saw the first of the government's proposed anti-terror laws passed by the Senate. They're part of a broad package aimed at expanding the powers of government agencies to counter terrorism.
But civil libertarians say the laws go further than necessary and take away the very freedoms that they are meant to protect. Potentially anyway. Joining us to discuss is Dr Greg Barton from the Global Terrorism Research Centre and Green Senator Scott Ludlam. Good morning to you both, gentlemen. Greg, if I can start with you and just look at a couple of these laws in more detail.
Sure.
One of the proposed laws grants officers the right to issue a warrant which will cover not just a computer but a whole computer network. And some tech experts have said, well, potentially, given the way that computers are networked these days, that covers the whole internet. So every single one of us could be subject to monitoring on the basis of one warrant.
Yeah, I don't think that's the intention, but certainly the detail needs to be spelled out. And we've had the same problem with the metadata discussion. The detail's just not been spelled out after all these weeks of discussion. So that's something that has to be looked at for sure.
I mean, does that surprise you that that detail has not yet been spelled out? Does that smack to you of a very reactive and rushed legislative package?
I don't know that it's any sort of malintent so much as probably the senior people were responsible not really knowing the technology very well themselves and not being able to explain it very well themselves. We've seen the Attorney General sort of stumble with metadata in the past. But I also think, yes, there has been a degree of rush, but there's no real good reason for not getting the details right now. That's what we should expect.
Yeah, indeed. We don't want to rush these things. Scott, let's bring you in now. One of the most controversial elements of these laws, and perhaps the most concerning, is the increased penalty for disclosing information about intelligence operations. Effectively, it could well discourage whistleblowers. We're looking at an increase in the penalty from 5 to 10 years. What concerns do you have about that?
Well, my real concern is that national security reporting will just disappear in this country. They've increased the penalties for whistleblowing. They've also increased the penalties for reporting on this new category of investigation called a special intelligence operation. So you as journalists can be jailed for inadvertently revealing details of one of these new kinds of operation. And, it might be that we would never have found out, for example, about bugging the East Timorese cabinet room to advantage an Australian party in a gas negotiation. So I understand why they want to protect Australia from espionage, and I have no problem with that. But it also catches that kind of dodgy behaviour, and anything that we do that criminalises journalism, we should be very, very careful of.
Scott, a study was published a while back which demonstrated that your chance of being killed by a terrorist action in Australia between 1970 and 2010 was 1 in 33 million, as compared to, say, 1 in 15,000 for road deaths, or in any particular year, the chances of being killed by your intimate partner as a woman are 120 times greater than your chances of, being killed by a terrorist over the course of a lifetime. Do you think that the general sense of alarm around this and the legislation that is being rushed through to cater to that alarm is disproportionate to the threat?
Well, I think we've got to be really careful. No government of any political stripe wants to let a terrorist attack in Australia go through on their watch. But I'm glad you've brought up some of those numbers just to lend a sense of perspective. In particular, the domestic violence argument. I'd like to see the emergency action plan for that. The laws, I guess I would just condition my comments a little bit. These haven't been rushed through. These ones have actually been in the pipeline for a long time. If anything, I'm more worried about the data retention laws that your other guest mentioned earlier, which may well be forced through the Parliament before the end of the year. It's essential that we don't overreact. One of the crucial tactics, I guess, of terror networks is to try and raise the level of fear and alarm in our society. I think Australia is better than that, and I don't think we should take the bait. We need to proceed this debate in a much more measured way, and some of the government's tactics certainly aren't helping.
Greg, I'm interested to hear your perspective on that. Do you believe that it's disproportionate, the threat to the alarm?
Yeah, here's the paradox. The threat that terrorism represents to us as individuals is very, very low, as those numbers attest. And it's a bit higher now, but they're still pretty low. And yet the scale of the problem facing police and government is very high. I mean, it's a serious problem, but we shouldn't feel we can't go to the train station or go out and go to the football match, get on with life. We can and should. So we have to do all this work and unfortunately spend all this money, and unfortunately we need to change, legislation. We have to do it carefully. But actually the threat to us, it's like the shark at the beach. It always scares us, but, driving to the beach is more dangerous than swimming there.
And Greg, very quickly before we go, I mean, Scott raised the concern about the metadata part of the legislation, the telcos keeping the metadata from all our calls and online transactions. What do you see as the problem with that?
There's a couple of problems. There's a privacy problem, potentially. There's also just the on-cost to the telcos and the ISPs, unless this is defined nice and tightly. But I think the earlier problem that Scott raised is the more serious problem, the question of reporting. We need transparency, we need confidence in the community, and that's the big thing. Same thing with metadata, though. If we don't have confidence, then if we think the government's spying on us, then we don't speak up when we should, and that's a key thing in this whole issue.
Yes, indeed. All right, well, Greg, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Scott Ludlam from Perth, thank you very much for getting up